Hello, everyone. My name is Fish, and welcome back to Cursed Recounts. Today, we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be reading 3 shorter creepypastas. The first one, we will be reading The Thing That Stalks the Fields. It was a few weeks ago that the hay bales started creeping slowly away from my house. Every morning when I woke up, each had moved a few hundred feet from where it was before. I assumed it was pranksters with nothing better to do, so I ignored it. Within a few days, though, the bales began to approach the boundaries of the farm. I was tired of the whole game by then and decided to move them back. It took a tedious hour to bring them all from where they were over near to the house again. And by the time I was done, I was ready to snap the neck of whatever little pissant was deciding to screw with me. The next morning, I found each and every one of my horses messily decapitated. The smell was what woke me up. Each one was slumped over against the side of its stall. There were no signs of the heads. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the mess and burying the remains. It was only when I was done that I noticed the bales of the hay had all been returned to their positions from the day before, scattered far out into the fields. This time I left them where they were. That night I sat on my porch with my shotgun in hand and a pot of coffee on the table beside me. I sat for hours, straining my eyes into the fields to catch a glimpse of who was moving my hay bales. Finally, I was beginning to nod off. I would have, but just as my eyes began to close, I heard a clamor and a rustling of trees from the nearby woods. I leaned forward, my heart racing with excitement. I was going to catch the bastard. I fumbled with my gun and fidgeted in my seat, waiting anxiously for whoever it was to get close enough to ambush. It was only then the thing got close enough for me to make out its silhouette in the dark that I was frozen still. The thing that crept into my fields from the nearby woods didn't seem to notice me sitting there. It stalked, hunched and deliberate, through the field with the posture of a tiptoeing thief, if not for the fact that it must have towered to over 10 feet tall. Even in its crouched position, it might have seemed almost frail. The thinness of its arms and legs and the emaciated, caved-in quality of its chest reminded me of a starving animal. Still, this thing was undeniably strong. I'd watched it hoist each bale up into its arms with ease and set it down carefully a while away, taking only a few strides to cover the distance. I watched it work, moving each bale thoughtfully. Every once in a while it would straighten up to look at the other bale's positions in the fields before adjusting to the one it was working on ever so slightly. Before it left, it looked towards the house. I felt its eyes sweep over me in the dark, but whether it saw me or not, I couldn't tell. Then it turned silently and crept back the way it came, disappearing into the dark of the woods. It took me an hour before I had the courage to move at all. I went inside after a while, but I didn't get any sleep. It was only when the sun rose that I dared step off my porch into the fields. The hay bales were where it left them. Strangely, it didn't move them as far as it had in the previous days. The next morning, the hay bales hadn't moved at all. They didn't move at all for the rest of the week, in fact. They were finally where that thing wanted them. It made myself sick just trying to interpret them. Why would this thing expend so much energy moving my hay bales and threaten me with such violence should I try to intervene? Killing my horses was just that, a threat, an intelligent threat at that. It knew what would scare me, and it knew that I would understand the implications. The sound of an automobile working its way along the road to my farm one morning gave me a little rush of excitement. I've been planning to abandon the farm since I saw the thing, but I couldn't hope to leave on foot without risking it treating me like it treated my horses. But if I could get in the car with whoever was coming my way, I might be able to escape before it could stop me. I didn't know or care who it was. I decided that the moment they stopped the car, I would jump in the passenger seat and tell them to get the hell out of here. I didn't get the chance. The car worked its way slowly along the road, trundling across the uneven ground. I urged it silently to hurry. It was when it passed between the two hay bales placed on either side of the road that I began to hear a booming clatter from the woods. The thing burst suddenly from between the trees, sprinting on all fours of its terrible, gangly limbs towards the car. And within a few seconds it was there, pouncing on the automobile like a predatory cat. Within moments, it was picking and peeling the vehicle's steel frame apart, working to get at the driver. The man, whoever he was, screamed all the while, and I could hear him even over the crunching of the metal and the shattering of glass. It was only when the thing crushed him carelessly in its hand that the screaming stopped. It tossed him away. It straightened up to look at me once again. In the sunlight, I could see the inhumanity of it. It was composed entirely of something awful and alive which was lashed together in a messy semblance of a human form. Whatever it was made of looked so polished and hard that if it weren't for the minute writhing of the stuff, I'd think it was made of granite. The thing retreated back into the woods, and I was left to my shock. My eyes wandered to where the car sat, the engine still sputtering between the two of the hay bales. Suddenly, I understood. The message was clear. I'm this thing's captive, and I'm not allowed visitors. Nothing may cross the borders it had set. I'm trapped here by the thing that stalks the fields, and it demands nothing except that I never leave. Still, I don't know if I can handle being in that thing's cannery. I've been thinking hard for the last few days since I saw it crush that man's chest and silence him before he could finish his scream. If I crossed the hay bale border, it'd probably do the same. It'd smash my skull before I could put my hands up to protect myself. It'd go and find a new pet, and probably keep looking until it found someone who could stand knowing that it was waiting just outside, watching, and at all hours with its shiny insect eyes. I've been thinking hard for the last few days, and I might just make a run for it. For this next story, we will be reading Normal Porn for Normal People. Everyone knows that if you surf the web long enough, you'll see some pretty sick shit. This is especially true if you intentionally dive into the dark underbelly of the internet. I've seen quite a few things I don't care to admit, but one thing that I'll always remember is a site called normalpornfornormalpeople.com. The first strange thing about the site is that I didn't find it by actually looking for it. It was emailed to me by someone I didn't know. The email was as follows. Hi there. Found the site is very nice, thought you might like. Normalpornfornormalpeople.com. Pass it on for the good of mankind. Pretty standard issue chain letter, although the URL and its last remark really piqued my curiosity. I was having a very boring day when I got this, so I made sure my antivirus was working, and then I clicked on it. It was a very average, very generic looking site.
It gave the impression that the creators just barely gave a shit about making it look professional. The author seemed to have a very tenuous grasp on English, and on the front page was a long, pretty boring and incoherent rant that I don't remember or have saved. The site had a strange tagline which even today people haven't figured out the meaning of, which was, "Normal porn for normal people, a website dedicated to the eradication of abnormal sexuality." And from the sound of that, I wasn't really sure if I was here to watch porn or if I'd stumble onto some kind of eugenics program, but I was here now, and I was very, very curious to see what normal people got their rocks off to. So I scrolled down through the rant and nothing. The page didn't seem to link to anywhere else, and I was about to leave when I noticed that every word of the rant was its own hyperlink. I clicked one of them, and was sent to a white page with a very long list of links in the form of normalpeople.com/random letters. So I stopped for a minute and asked myself if I really wanted to waste God knows how much time clicking through random links that would likely give me a virus that would rape my computer. I figured I'd try it maybe for, 5 minutes, just to see if anything came up. I clicked one of the links and was sent to another page. This page apparently had totally different URLs than the last one. I was just about to say fuck this when I clicked on the third link, and a video download came up. It was called peanut.avi, a 30-minute video of a man, a woman, and a dog in a kitchen. The woman made a peanut butter sandwich, and the man set it down for the dog to eat. This was all that happened for maybe 30 minutes. It was obvious that the cameraman had to stop filming and wait until the dog was ready to eat again, and the dog seemed rather sick by the end of it. I know what you're thinking. What the hell does this have to do with porn? I have no clue. I've seen a little over 24 videos from this site, and the majority had no sexual activity at all. After watching peanut.avi, I went on a certain image board I frequent to play online show and tell, like I always do with weird shit like this. But someone had already made a thread about it, a guy who received the same chain letter I did. The image board thread had lots of people with nothing better to do dig through the site, and that's how I saw the other videos. Most of those 24 videos were very uneventful and consisted of people talking to the cameraman in a room with nothing in it but a desk and a few chairs. I mean, literally nothing on the walls or in terms of furniture. The whole room had a very cold, sterile feel to it. The conversations were idle banter about previous jobs or embarrassing childhood moments. I kept expecting some kind of discussion about what the people were filming or what the site was about, but of course, nothing. You would never know these people had anything to do with porn if you saw it out of context. I will say one thing, though. The people who appeared in these videos were quite attractive. However, the other videos that actually did feature content I suppose could be called sexual were where things got weird. I'll give a brief description of the stranger videos. If you're really eaten up with curiosity, you can try and hunt them down on a torrent site. LickedClean.avi, a 10-minute video filmed by a hidden camera in which we see a repairman working on a washing machine for the first 2 minutes. When it's fixed, the repairman goes to talk to the owner briefly, and then leaves. The owner checks to make sure the repairman is gone, then begins to lick all over the top of the washing machine. This goes on for 7 minutes. Jimbo.avi, a 5-minute video of an obese mime performing his act. It was actually pretty funny, particularly one part where he pretends to pull up a chair and then pretends that it breaks because of his weight. In the last 30 seconds of the video, the camera cuts to static briefly, then cuts back to the man subbing quietly, still wearing the mime outfit and makeup. Some kind of obscure fetish? Diana.avi, a 4-minute video in which the cameraman talks to a woman in a room different from the interview room. This room looks like one you'd find in a normal person's house. Exactly where they are is not specified, as Diana only talks about her violin playing. She obviously plays her violin, but she keeps getting distracted by something. I didn't notice this until someone on the image board thread pointed it out, but if you look at the mirror in the background, you can see a fat man in a chicken mask masturbating. Jessica.avi. Another 4-minute cameraman video. This time he's outside of a house, talking to another young woman. They talk about canoe rides, and the camera zooms out to reveal the city streets behind them occasionally. The strange thing is that no one so far has been able to identify where this street is. Guesses have ranged everywhere from Europe to Australia to the Philippines, but there's yet to be a match for the street shown in the video. Tongue-tied.avi. 10-minute video. The first 5 minutes consist of an elderly woman making out with a mannequin. The video cuts out like it did in Jimbo.avi halfway through, and the scene is then a group of mannequins huddled together in a circle around the camera. The lights have been dimmed, and the elderly woman is nowhere to be seen. From this point on, there's no sound. Stumps.avi. 5-minute long video where a man with no legs is attempting to breakdance on a DDR mat in what looks like the kitchen from Peanut.avi, but much dirtier. There's a radio playing music unseen in the background, but it stops at the 4-minute mark when the man collapses on the mat in exhaustion. He breathes heavily and pleads with someone off-screen to let him rest. This off-screen person becomes terrifyingly enraged and yells at him to keep dancing, which he does. You can hear this off-screen person begin to scream as the video ends abruptly. Privacy.avi. The woman from Diana.avi is masturbating on the mattress in the interview room, while the man from Stumps.avi walks around on his hands wearing some kind of goblin mask. The door in this room was always closed in the other videos, but it's now open. In this video, the only light is in the room and the hallway is dark. Near the end of the video, you can see an animal quickly run through the hallway. And finally, the last video we uncovered. Useless.avi. In this 18-minute video, a blonde woman from one of the previous interview videos is tied down to a mattress in the interview room. She attempts to scream, but her mouth is taped over. After 7 minutes, a man in a black suit and a mask opens the door, but he does not enter. He holds the door open for the animal that was running in the hall in the previous video. It's revealed to be an adult chimpanzee, its hair shaved and its entire body painted red. When the chimp enters the room, the masked man closes the door behind it. The chimpanzee sniffs the air for a moment, it may have been blind, and notices the woman tied to the mattress. It goes into a frenzy and begins to maul her. The assault goes on for a grueling 7 minutes until the woman finally dies. The chimp eats flesh from her corpse for 4 minutes as the video ends. The thread exploded with activity after this video was uncovered, and people discussed it long into the night. When I came back to the image board the next day, I found out that it had been deleted. I tried to start another one, and they banned me. I tried emailing the guy who sent me the chain letter with the site's URL. I sent him 5 messages and never got a response. I've tried to discuss this website on various places and have been banned frequently. The site itself was also deleted about 3 days after useless.avi was uncovered, likely because someone contacted the authorities about it. The only proof that normalpornfornormalpeople.com ever existed was a few screen caps people took, with videos from the site that people saved and uploaded on torrents, the most popular of which was useless.avi, which found its way onto a few gore sites. Wherever you upload them to, all the videos from normalpornfornormalpeople.com get deleted after a while. And finally, with our last story, let's read It Has No Face. Everyone has tales about the strange and bizarre. My story is about how my half-whole mask saved my life and continues to save my life to this very day. Late in December, I was traveling north from California to my home state of Oregon. Nothing fancy, I was just going to go visit the family for the holidays. On my way north, I hit a small snowstorm, nothing awful, just a lot of snow falling all at once. I wasn't worried about all the small increase of snow at first, considering I had snow tires installed before I started my long journey home. I did, however, get a little hesitant to drive when the snow started to really come down. The large amount of falling snow, coupled with the large amounts already littering the ground as I traveled higher into the mountains, caused me to consider finding a place to stay for the night. I figured I could get some sleep while the storm passes over. That and the fact that I could give my car's heater a break before it would decide to burst into flames, or worse, just stop working altogether. I scanned as much of the landscape as I could, but there were no buildings in the immediate area. The only other option I had for my predicament was to keep driving and hope there was a town or exit nearby that I could take in order to escape from the storm. I must have been driving for at least an hour before I saw a sign up ahead indicating how far the closest city was. My heart sank a little when I read 162 miles as it flew by my windshield and vanished into the snowy night. At this point, the snow was beating against my windshield, and I knew I wasn't going to last 162 minutes, let alone 162 miles. The digital clock on my radio read 1:21 a.m., and I decided that the next turnoff I saw I would take and hope that I could find a neighborhood that would produce some results on my current endeavor. My thought process was either freeze to death in my car or stay the night at some random person's house. Weighing the two options in my head, I picked the only thing a sane person would pick and go with the house. Another 30 minutes flew by and still no luck finding a place to pull off. Just when I was about to start losing hope, I saw a turnoff in the distance. A small shape started making its way closer into my headlights, and upon further inspection, it was revealed to me that they were two wooden poles that possibly belonged to a fence. When I turned onto the road between the two wooden poles, the ground beneath me felt rocky and rough, like I was traveling on gravel. I didn't drive for too long before I started to see a small cabin creep into my field of view. The lights in the cabin were off, but the place seemed to be in good shape. I parked my car under a tall, wild-looking tree that took residence on the cabin's front lawn. Getting out of my car, I immediately grabbed my extra jacket and put it on, pulling the half-hole mask I wore around my neck up and over my ears to keep the heat around my face. I put my cap on and trudged up to the cabin after putting my cap snug on my head. As I traveled through the cold, windy night up to, what I felt was my salvation, and I immediately regretted not getting any gloves for my hands. Despite the irritation with my hands, my face and the rest of my body were comfortably warm, so I didn't have much room to complain. I stuffed my frozen hands deep into my pockets and continued my journey across the cabin's lawn. As I made my way up to the door, I noticed something odd. There was no indication of life anywhere. There wasn't even a car in the front yard. Taking my right hand out of my pocket, I knocked 3 times, waiting patiently before saying, "Hello? Is anyone in there? I'm sorry to bother you so late at night, but I need a place to stay for a few hours." Nothing answered my plea for help, so I knocked 3 more times on the door, hitting my knuckles harder against the aged wood of the entrance. "Hello?" I said again, a little louder, before continuing with, I'm not here to rob you or anything. I just need a place to stay for the rest of the night. I promise I'll be gone in the sunrise." As I finished my sentence, I touched the ornate metal door handle. Noticing that the door seemed to be unlocked, I said in a loud voice, "I'm coming in now. If there's anybody in there, let me know now, please." I pressed the metal lever down, finding it a bit odd that the door was unlocked, and opened the door with little resistance on the other end, closing it behind me with about the same resistance, despite the fact the door looked really old. Looking around the area, I noticed the cabin had 5 rooms. The living room, which was the biggest room, a small kitchen, an even smaller washroom, and what I assumed were 2 small bedrooms in the back. No lights were on inside this cozy cabin, making it almost pitch dark if my eyes weren't already adjusted to the darkness from outside. I decided the best thing to do would be to search for a light switch, so I took out my phone and turned on my flashlight app to scan the walls. My scan produced no results, however, and at the risk of losing precious battery power on my phone, I decided the best option would be to turn it off and put my phone on airplane mode. Before turning off my light, I studied the paintings hanging on the wall that I glossed over in the initial scan. Each painting that crossed my sights was just typical landscapes of harbor, things like that. There was a painting that looked like a fox hunt or something like that, but other than that, it was just typical paintings you would see hanging on the walls around an elderly person's home. There was a painting, however, that caught my attention. The painting was small and consisted of what looked like two adults, a mother, a father, a teenage girl, and a small child. The family captured in that painting were wearing what looked like Victorian-era clothing. I'm only guessing about the clothes. I mean, they could have been from the 1800s or the early 20th century, but the point is that the clothing was very ornate and regal. There was something really disturbing about the image in the painting, though. The face of every member of the family looked like they were smoothed over with clay. It's kind of hard to describe it, but the three family members looked like they had no facial features. By no facial features, I mean instead of the normal facial features you and I have, the three people in the painting had grooves of smooth flesh where normally you would have an eye, nose, or mouth. The only person in the painting that didn't possess a blank face was the teenage girl, which had normal facial features for a teenage girl. In fact, she was quite breathtaking. I pulled myself away from the painting to take a glance at my phone for a time. My phone indicated that it was past 2 in the morning, so I decided to go in the back room and check to see if it was occupied. To my relief, the room was vacant besides a medium-sized bed, ornate dresser, and nightstand, but there wasn't much to go by. The walls were blank besides more sappy paintings to give it a little more atmosphere. Although there was no indication of a heating system besides a chimney, the rooms were bearable enough that I figured I could just bundle up in my clothes under the covers in order to stay warm. I was only going to be there for a few hours anyway, so there wasn't much point in starting a fire, plus the people who owned the cabin wouldn't be back tonight considering how late it was. I hopped into the worn-out bed facing the open door next to another door I assumed was a closet and pulled my half-whole mask completely up over my face to make sure my head would stay nice and warm for the rest of my stay. Pulling the fabric of my mask down slightly, I set the alarm on my phone for 4:30 a.m. and put it back down onto the nightstand. I covered up my face again and bundled up tightly with the sheets, closing my eyes and letting dreamland take away until I woke up after what felt like minutes later to a sound of scratching. My body froze as I heard the noise over and over and over again, softly coming from the closed door. I tried to relax myself by thinking that all the noise that I heard was just a rat or some other animal that was spending the night in the closet while the cabin's owners were away. Quietly, I shifted onto my back, pulling my half-whole mask down slightly so a little slit appeared, giving me a small window to look at what was out there. I laid on the bed, stiff as a board, with my cap and mask covering my face in such a way that it acted like a visor, giving me a small peek of what was in the darkness. Thankfully, my eyes were still adjusted to the dark, which gave me a small amount of reassurance as I continued looking in the direction the scratching noise was coming from. The scratching continued, louder and longer for what seemed like minutes until, just like that, it suddenly stopped. Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't a safe kind of silence. The deafening silence in the room was a foreboding, ominous sort of silence. The vacuum of sound in the air was the type of silence that happens in a movie just before something jumps out at you. Just when I began to calm myself down, the doorknob to the closet began to jiggle and turned very slowly. My heart was racing out of my chest as I saw and heard that knob turn, and every inch of my body wanted to bolt out of that bed and out of that cabin before whatever was on the other side of that door got out after me.
I laid perfectly still on the bed despite the fact that I had a cocktail of adrenaline, nerves, and instincts telling me to get the hell out of there. My eyes widened as the door to the closet opened slightly, and I saw what looked like a dried head attached to an elongated neck pop out of the opening, followed by a skeletal body. The thing that was emerging from the closet crawled on all fours out of the doorway, and it slowly made its way up to the bed I was sleeping in. I had never been more frightened in my whole entire life as this thing stood up, almost touching the roof of the cabin, and looked down in my direction. The creature stood there, studying me as I peeked through the thin slit in my mask, pure terror swirling around in my mind as I glanced up at the body of the creature. Looking at the creature's skeletal face, I noticed that it had no eyes in its eye sockets, which led me to believe that it couldn't see me even though I could see it. Just when the idea of it had not been able to see me started to give me a little more comfort, the creature began to speak.
Strange.
The creature whispered softly as it continued to watch me, and then it began to speak again.
It has no fear of me.
The creature continued to say in a hoarse tone as it began to breathe loudly, continuing to look at me and gripping down on the edge of my bed. Feeling the creature's bony hand touch the edge of my bed caused my brain to go into complete panic mode. The only thing that stopped me from jumping up was the thought that maybe the creature believed that I was dead or asleep and wouldn't attack.
How can it not fear? How can it not fear me?
The thing said through clenched teeth before loudly gasping and suddenly pulling back with its mouth open in an expression that seemed like fear.
It has no face.
The thing whispered to itself as it continued to back away.
It has no face.
The creature said again, but this time louder than before and slightly more threatening.
It has no face.
The creature shouted as it backed off further away from the bed. I heard the thing breathing loudly and quickly before calming down and slowly returning to the side of the bed. Leaning over me slowly, the creature continued to look at me before softly beginning to breathe on my face. I could smell its foul breath even through my mask. The smell was so powerful that it took all my strength not to gag as a reflex to the awful stench. In my mind, I made the choice to keep motionless and not do or say anything that could compromise whatever illusion I was giving that thing that was currently studying me. The creature breathed on me again softly. The stench I smelled from its breath could only be described as pure death, which only strengthened my resolve to stay perfectly motionless.
Strange.
The thing whispered at me again, leaning in closer to me to the point where I could see it and smell its decaying flesh. The creature slowly reached for me, its hand slowly moving towards my face. With every inch that decaying hand moved, I couldn't help but feel my situation become more and more dire. I thought that this was it for me. The creature would kill me tonight or take me away and torture me and then kill me, and then no one would know what happened to me. No one would find my body out here and no one would know my story. I could feel tears start to swell up in my eyes as I thought of everyone I ever loved being yanked away from me in this one moment.
No face. No face. No face.
The creature softly chanted as its hand crept over closer to my face. I could hear the anguish in the creature's voice as it continued to chant over and over as it reached for me. As the creature's long, bony hand crept only centimeters away from my face, I braved myself for the worst, making the last thoughts I would ever have about the people who I loved.
Just as I thought my life was over, all of a sudden, a loud noise interrupted from the room, filling the ear closest to the nightstand with a flood of beeps and causing the creature to scream and jump back. As the noise continued, the creature threw itself against the wall, shrieking uncontrollably with terror as it stumbled back towards the closet. I was dumbstruck for a second before the thought came to me that I set my alarm for 4:30 a.m., which must have been the source for the noise. I jumped out of the bed, grabbing my phone and pointing the lit-up screen at the monster as the alarm continued to ring loudly. The loud ringing caused the monster to shriek even more in confusion and terror as it retreated quicker as I approached. Seeing my chance, I activated my phone's flashlight and put it on strobe mode in order to disorientate the monster further.
No face, no face, no face.
The creature shrieked at me as I withdrew to the safety of the closet. I continued to shine my light on the creature, and for added effect I started playing loud music as I continued to jab my phone in the monster's direction like a lion tamer. The thing threw itself into the dark recesses of the closet, and I shoved the door back, locking it after I slammed it closed. The shrieks coming from the monster started to get fainter and fainter, like it was retreating deeper into the house.
No face, no face. It has no face.
I could hear the creature yell out as it got further and further away. After hearing the last retreating words of the thing that terrified me the whole night, I bolted from the cabin at breakneck speed, jumping into my car and floored it off the gravel road. I was shaking all over as I drove, and when I pulled my half-whole mask further down, my exposed skin was as white as the snow that littered the ground. I was so frightened by the whole experience. As soon as I pulled into the first town I saw, I parked my car and I began to sob uncontrollably for a while. The experience that I had just been through would scar me for life, but as I wept in my car in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven, I couldn't help but start to laugh a little between my fits of crying. I got through my ordeal, and so much without a scratch on me. Well, besides the mental scars, I was fine. I was alive, and I didn't have to worry anymore. After I was finished with my whole episode of crying and laughing like an insane person, I entered the store sniffling and wiping away the rest of my tears. As I continued into the store, the cashier looked up at me and traced my direction with his eyes before continuing with what he was doing. The store was mostly empty. Besides an elderly couple, I was the only customer in there. "Had a rough night?" the cashier said with one eyebrow cocked up while he scanned my items. You have no idea," I said, looking out the window at the sunny winter day. "I noticed you looked a bit upset when you came in. What happened? Did you get dumped or something?" he said, looking up at me as the register computed how much I owed him. Looking at the young man behind the register, he seemed to be a little younger than I was, although that doesn't say much because even though I'm 22, I look younger than my actual age. I looked up at the cashier's name tag for a second before feeling that I had nothing to lose by telling him about the night I just had. The small name on his ID tag read Evan, and as I finished telling him my frightening tale, something odd happened. I expected him to just burst out laughing or say I was the best liar he had ever talked to, but instead of doing any of that, Evan just stood there, his skin milk white as he stared at me with an expression so horrified he gave me the impression that he had just witnessed someone getting run over by a train or something. Evan, are you all right?" I said, looking into his eyes while we both stood there quietly. "What? Yeah, it's just," Evan began to say before his thoughts trailed off due to the new feeling that we were both being watched. I began to feel eyes burning into the back of my head before turning around to see the old couple I glanced at when I entered the store beforehand. The old couple possessed the same horrified look that Evan just had a few seconds ago. They must have heard the whole story. After a few moments of silence, the old couple asked me what I knew about the cabin, to which I couldn't really say. I gave them the best description that I could about what I saw. The couple proceeded to tell me that about the cabin, how long it's been there, and that it was haunted by a presence so terrifying that the place was condemned and left to rot away after so many people disappeared there. They told me that no one who ever stayed in that cabin has ever been seen alive again, if they've ever been seen at all after their visit. One of my best friends stayed the night in that cabin, Evan said quietly as he stared off into the distance, but continued his thoughts. I refused to go in that cabin, but I knew something bad would happen if we went. I tried so hard to convince him that the dare was stupid and to not go in, but he refused to and labeled me as chicken shit and continued with the dare. Evan's eyes began to water as he continued with the story. I never saw him again after that night. I kept calling his house, but his parents still couldn't find him. We put out flyers and billboards, but we never had any luck. After a few days, we contacted the police, and I told them about the cabin. Evan began to choke down his tears as he clenched his fist. They found him in the basement of that cabin, sprawled out on the floor. His eyes were surgically removed from his eye sockets. His nose was removed, and his lips, they were sliced off. When they found him, he was naked with an incision from the bottom of his rib cage to his pelvis down to the middle of his body. All of his internal organs were extracted from his body, and to add insult to injury, his genitals were sliced clean off. He was put in a Victorian-era clothing, and there were 3 other bodies in a similar state to him, but you want to know the worst part of it all? Well, the police did an autopsy on the body. They found out he was alive during the whole process. Evan winced as he remembered the whole gruesome sight and said, They never found out who or what did it. There was no DNA evidence to convict anybody. They didn't find the tools that made the incisions. They didn't find anything. Evan clenched his fist tighter on the table before the old man listening to our conversation put his hand on Evan's shoulder and began to reassure him that it was going to be all right. As he comforted Evan, he looked at me and said,
People have been disappearing from this area for decades, maybe even centuries for all we know, but the bodies end up the same gruesome way. I don't care who you are, no one deserves something like that happening to them. They should just torch that evil place to the ground.
The old lady joined her husband's side, and she looked at me with the most foreboding face I'd ever seen.
If your story is true, you should consider yourself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. In all my years of living, you are the only one to go in that cabin and come out alive.
The man said, gripping onto his wife's hands tightly as he spoke to me. After hearing the old man's words, I realized that Evan said the body of his friend was found in the basement, which explains why the monster's voice got fainter. It would have pulled me into the basement if my phone hadn't gone off. I quickly paid for my items and left the store, much more troubled now than I ever was when I entered. Feeling drowsy due to the lack of sleep and constant adrenaline rush caused by my whole terrible ordeal, I decided to go to a hotel and spend the day sleeping and relaxing to get my mind off things. That night, I sat on my bed in my hotel room and looked at the 2 items that saved my life. In one hand, I gripped onto my half-whole mask, which hid my face from that terrible monster. And in my other hand, I held my cell phone, which scared away the horrible beast that could have killed me. I decided that from that day on, I would always wear my half-whole mask to bed. It saved my life, and that's the least I can do for it. The recent brush with death I just experienced had taught me that life is too precious to waste, so I decided to ask my best friend Samantha out on a date, and things worked perfectly. Samantha and I were together for 2 years before I recently asked for her hand in marriage, which she said yes. Part of me will never forget that awful night, and because of it, not only have I been wearing my half-whole mask to bed every night since then, I've also made it a priority not to live in any type of house that has a basement. As an added safety measure, I started locking every door before going to bed. It's a pain, but you can never be too careful. Despite these crazy precautions, Samantha has accepted my little quirks and has continued to be supportive as we continued our journey through life together. I couldn't be happier with the way things turned out in my life, and I'm so lucky to be with Samantha. Everything's perfect. There's just one thing that bothers me, though, and I think I might just have to blame my imagination, but sometimes when I wake up at night, when it's really quiet, sometimes I'll hear soft scratching noises. Also, and I think it's just paranoia, but I swear, sometimes I hear something whisper,
"No face. It has no face,"
from inside my closet. And with that, thank you for listening to this episode of Cursed Recounts. As per usual, I will leave links in the description of every story that I've read on this episode. Each and every story that I read is not owned by me. All credit for the story goes to the authors who respectfully written them.